Hello, hello. Thank you so much for being here. I know, have some people still trickling in as you come out of classes and so forth, and we just so appreciate you taking this gorgeous sunny afternoon to be with us and these really exciting, visionary local and regional leaders. This is the first ever Smart Jobs Summit at Vanderbilt University, and we really hope that this will be an annual tradition. I am Amanda Little. I teach journalism and science writing, and I'm a columnist for Bloomberg with a focus on climate change. And Stephen Ornes and I, who are here moderating the event together, are both writers. We are both science writers, and we are riveted by and thrilled by the story of the energy transition in the Southeast. This is something that is often overlooked. This is a region that has been experiencing really significant climate pressures. It's a region that's not known to be particularly on the front end of environmental regulations and climate policies, but it is a region that has a private sector that is firing up and taking the lead on exciting innovations in clean energy progress. And it's happening in EVs, electric vehicles. It's happening in wind and solar. Solar in particular is happening in this field called agrivoltaics, which is the integration of clean energy and farming. And it's a really diverse, exciting story that we hope to inspire you in the next hour. And we have these leaders from scholarship in law, in entrepreneurialism, in advocacy, who are going to tell you the story of this energy transition. This is a campus that is also experiencing its own form of energy transition. Our on-site energy has transitioned from coal to natural gas and now to solar. So this is a very hyper-local story, and this is a state-level story and a regional story. And it all spells job opportunity for all you rising students and the rising generation. Stephen, over to you, and then we will turn it over to our panelists. Thank you so much for being here.
Great. I just wanted to also extend my welcome to you. Thank you so much for coming out today. We are, Amanda and I are so excited about this panel, and I'm so excited to hear this conversation and see where it takes us. So just to sort of set the scene, as science writers, we like data, we like evidence. So just to get some brief snapshot of sort of energy in Tennessee. According to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, Tennessee consumes 3 times as much energy as it produces. And most of the state's electricity generating capacity is owned by the Tennessee Valley Authority, or TVA, who were not able to make it today. But just that's where most of your energy is coming from. The facilities include 19 hydroelectric dams, 7 natural gas power plants, 4 coal-fired power plants, 2 nuclear power plants, 1 pumped storage hydroelectric plant. And just to get a sense of the distribution, in 2021, 43% of the state's net electricity generation came from nuclear power. Coal was second at 22%. Natural gas came in third with 18%. Hydropower, Raccoon Mountain, if anybody's is an example of that, but there are other facilities, provided 16% of Tennessee's total in-state electricity, and the rest was from other renewables. So you can add up those numbers, but I'll tell you the big picture is that we have work to do, right? There is so much opportunity to grow and so much excitement in the renewable energy sector, especially in the Southeast and here in Tennessee. And so we chose this particular panel to bring together. We've got amazing science research going on right at national labs. We've got forward-looking companies bringing solar cells. We've got advocates and lawyers. So it's a very exciting time. So we're going to quickly introduce our speakers and then turn it over to them for, so they can speak for themselves and start the conversation. So first, I would like to introduce Dr. Susan Hubbard. Dr. Hubbard is the Deputy for Science and Technology at the Oak Ridge National Lab. She oversees an expansive portfolio of research and development projects, including in material science, environmental research, energy science and technology, fission and fusion energy, and other areas. She is also a pioneering hydrogeologist whose work has led to new ways to measure water availability, water quality, carbon cycling in natural systems. She is a member of the National Academy of Engineering and a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, the American Geophysical Union, and the Geological Society of America. And she has worn many hats. In addition to her work at Oak Ridge, she's a professor at the University of California, Berkeley, chair of the Hydrosphere and Atmosphere section of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, that's AAAS. She earned her PhD in Civil and Environmental Engineering at Berkeley, and we are excited to welcome Dr. Hubbard's perspective on the state and the future of energy research and the kinds of work that needs to be done. I would also like to welcome Dr. Stephen Smith. Can you raise your hand real fast too? Yeah, thanks. Who brings 30 years of experience pushing for change for the environment. Since 1993, he has led the Southern Alliance for Clean Energy as its executive director. And under his leadership, the organization has grown to be a premier voice for clean energy issues in the region. And in addition to advocating for change in Tennessee, the organization works on issues in Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, North Carolina, Georgia, and South Carolina. He currently serves on the State of Tennessee Energy Policy Council and on the Knoxville Mayor's Climate Council. He serves on the board of Floridians for Social Choice, and in the past, he's served on the North Carolina Legislative Commission on Global Climate Change and the North Carolina Climate Action Planning Advisory Group. He holds a doctorate in veterinary medicine from the University of Tennessee and comes to us from Knoxville. All right, back to Amanda for our other two panelists.
Thank you, Stephen. Stephen and I are used to, journalists are not used to the collaborative interviewing process, so this is also a learning process for us as well. But we're delighted also to welcome Regan Farr, who is the co-founder and CEO of Silicon Ranch Corporation. I mentioned that word term agrivoltaics earlier. It's a solar energy developer in the Southeast based in Nashville. Pursues low-cost and energy-efficient efforts that can lead to economic growth and development. It was founded in 2011, and it's one of the largest solar power producers in the country, not exclusively integrated with farming, but that is my own personal fascination with a part of your work. And in December, the company announced that it would be partnering with Meta and the TVA on new solar projects in Georgia and Tennessee Valley, 720 megawatts to support its regional operations with 100% renewable energy. Regan is a former commissioner of revenue for the state of Tennessee, and during his years in Governor Phil Bredesen's administration, he and Matt Kisber, the head of Silicon Ranch's board and former CEO, were assigned to create a clean energy strategy for our state. And they recruited companies to Tennessee across solar, wind, and the biofuel space. So he's got an amazing breadth of understanding on this topic. And Amanda Garcia, at the end, is the director of the Tennessee office of the Southern Environmental Law Center, where she oversees a team of lawyers and communicators and administrators in legal projects aimed at achieving a livable climate and a healthy environment for everyone. Amanda advocates for support for the community and builds partnerships across the state. Her projects have included advocating for the TVA to clean up coal ash across the state and shift its power sources to clean renewable energy while protecting waterways. She also helped stop work on the Mahalia crude oil pipeline, which threatened the Memphis drinking water aquifer, and she continues to address environmental injustice in South Memphis. She has a law degree from the New York University School of Law. Thank you all so much for being here again. And we're going to turn it over to you. Just 3 to 5 minutes on the projects that you're working on right now, and what you're most excited about in your current portfolio and what lies ahead for you. Yes, we'll just go right down the line.
Do we need mics? Can y'all hear okay if I can project my voice?
No, mics for recording.
Okay, great. All right. Is this on? Yeah. So again, the Southern Alliance for Clean Energy, we are a regional energy policy and environmental advocacy organization. Where we fit into this is that we are engaging with utilities across the Southeast to try to talk about our core group. We try to impact the way that they do long-range planning. Integrated resource planning is what is called IRPs, where the utilities, by the time a multi-billion-dollar power plant gets to the point where it's about to be built, there's a long history that predated that, and if you don't actually engage with utilities further upstream for these kind of investments, those investments develop a head of steam by the time the public becomes aware of it. So we've been involved over the years in engaging across the Southeast and trying to impact and bend the curve of utility planning away from fossil and other high-risk energy sources to energy sources that are clean, renewable. We also do a lot of work in the clean transportation, basically decarbonization of transportation, so there's just a lot of work going on right now with electric vehicles. And we've got staff, we're a small nonprofit, 20, 25 staff across the region. And the things that we're probably most excited about, and we'll get into this, I think a number of the panelists will, is the fact that we just saw two of the most consequential federal pieces of legislation get passed over the last 18, 24 months, the bipartisan infrastructure bill and the Inflation Reduction Act, IRA. We call them IRA and Bill. And they are unleashing about $400 billion into this space. And so this is going to be a game changer. So it's something that a number of us have been advocating for quite a long time. Tremendous effort to get it through in the last couple of years, and kudos. And so this is a great opportunity to learn about that and some of the opportunities that will be emerging.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? Again, I'm Susan Hubbard. I'm the Deputy Director at Oak Ridge National Laboratory. So thought I'd start by saying a little bit about Oak Ridge National Laboratory. Many people don't know what a national laboratory is. We also hire a lot of people, so yeah, a shameless plug there. But also how we engage as a pretty significant science and technology organization with regional innovation, and then say a little bit about what some of the aspects that I think are super exciting in terms of regional innovation in Tennessee and sort of the underpinnings of those. So let me start by just saying that Oak Ridge National Laboratory is one of 17 national laboratories that are distributed around the United States. These were developed, or a subset of those, to meet, still they are focused on science and technology to meet national missions. Many of us, including Oak Ridge, and where I came from a year ago before I moved here, which was Berkeley National Laboratory, were formed to meet the national mission of the time, which was basically building weapons to win a war. And that was the Manhattan Project, coming soon to a theater near you, I hear, this summer. But the national mission has changed, and as you were alluding to, a lot of this money is flowing in because this administration has very ambitious goals for clean energy. That means decarbonizing the energy or electricity sector by 2035 and the whole economy by 2050. Extremely ambitious. And what that means for us and many folks in the research organizations are that there's aspects to do to take the technologies that we have, done proof of principle and developed and move them out in scale, and here's where we partner with other folks, but there's also a lot of early stage research that needs to be done to get to the more ambitious goals that take us out to 2050. So Oak Ridge itself has, it's been around this year, it's its 80-year history, and as we've already heard, it has many, many strengths. It's broad, there's 6,000 people there now, so really significant endeavor, and has had all kinds of scientific accomplishments throughout over the years. But one thing I would say that I'm really excited about, and I think it's quite unique in Tennessee, is the ability for the research institutions to work like Oak Ridge with Vanderbilt, with TVA and other folks in the state. There is somewhat of an alignment in certain sectors. You folks who have been here longer than I have in Tennessee can say a lot more. But there's a lot that can be done, and I would say that many of the challenges that face us, and this is why I'm excited actually to work on these sort of things, are what I call indivisible, meaning they can't really be done by one person or one discipline or one group. They really need teams of teams to work together. And by that I mean scientists and lawyers, economists, right? It really, these things that we're talking about, and we'll talk about today in clean energy transition, really need all kinds of skills to move the needle on. And as one of the largest of the Department of Energy Office of Science Lab, and actually the only one in the Southeast, we're incredibly interested in helping with this clean energy transition. And just to give a sense, we've already mentioned electrical vehicles, but if I could say a little bit about that, electrical, just in terms of the systems approach that's needed to really move the needle on these. So many of you know that electrical vehicles are part of our, the nation's decarbonization strategy, and it's important in Tennessee where there's various manufacturers here. We're the largest Southeast producer of electrical vehicles here with Volkswagen, Ford, General Motors, and so forth. And there's over 900, companies developing different parts. But it's not just production of these cars, it's the ecosystem that surrounds it that drives a lot of other innovation, technology, and jobs. For example, these cars, there's work to do in microelectronics. These cars are basically little laptops zooming along the road, right? There's work to be done in figuring out how to develop charging stations that connect rural and urban areas. There's supply chain issues. There's interconnection between the cars and the grids and so forth. And I would say that as we enhance our use of EVs, that means we need more electrons. And we mentioned TVA, right? TVA is responsible for delivering those electrons. They have a decarbonization strategy. We may talk about that a little bit more, right? But as they retire power plants, those need to be replaced with other technologies, carbon capture and storage, new ways to use hydrogen as fuels, more nuclear energy, right, which is a green energy, long-term storage. So all of these, I'm just trying to use this one thing, EV, as an example to say how exciting these fields are, because every single one of these technologies, they don't work in isolation. It's not just developing a tool and getting it out there in the marketplace. It's a whole ecosystem that surrounds that, and there's so many jobs for people that are interested both in the technology, but also in that all of those other jobs that need to really bring this to scale in the market. So look forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Regan Farr. I'm one of the co-founders and I'm the president and CEO of Silicon Ranch. And when we started Silicon Ranch back in 2011, there really wasn't a solar industry in the Southeast. It was a pretty nascent industry, mostly focused on in California and Arizona. And coming out of state government, having tried to put together an energy strategy for the state of Tennessee around economic development, we saw an opportunity early on to start a company here in the Southeast where we developed, owned, operated, and supported the growth of renewable energy. And it was really good timing. At the time that we did this, the only solar company of note that anyone would have heard of was Solar City, Elon Musk's Solar City. And when they IPO'd, they had 200 megawatts of solar. And that was considered game-changing at the time. Today, Silicon Ranch owns and operates over 15 times that much renewable capacity. And we've built and developed almost 3% of all of the solar that's operating in the continental US today. Mm-hmm. And a lot of that is here in the Southeast, which if you look at the map, a lot of the country has renewable portfolio standards where they're mandating the deployment of clean energy. We've really worked hard to develop and deploy this technology where there is no government mandate. And it has been an incredible opportunity to take an energy transition that is happening. It's not happening quick enough if you put an environmental hat on, but it's happening and trillions of dollars are being put to work behind this. And any field that you're interested in, marketing, English, science, finance, there is a role for you in this transition and your talents are needed. Our first employee at Silicon Ranch was an unpaid Owen MBA intern. He's now a VP at our company. He's recruited from Vanderbilt every year. I think we have 15 or 16 Vanderbilt grads on our team now, including Brooke, who actually came up through this group. And I would just say it's such an incredible time to be looking at job opportunities, because there is so much transition happening in this space, and we're still in the very early innings. So I would encourage you, whether it's from an advocacy standpoint or a pure science, which is kind of Oak Ridge, or legal, this is a space where there's just so much need for talent and passion, and you can do good while also creating value and creating and adding skills to your skill set as you think about professional development. So applaud your interest in this field and just say it's a world of opportunity out there.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Can y'all hear me? I'm Amanda Garcia. I'm the Tennessee Office Director for the Southern Environmental Law Center, and we are a leading environmental law organization that's rooted in the South. So like the other folks on the panel, we really have a place-based approach. We're working to advance the conversation around decarbonization and environmental justice and protecting our natural resources as we make that transition based on our knowledge, our deep knowledge of the politics and economics and legal frameworks that are in place in the Southeast. That doesn't mean that we accept them as, you know, immovable objects. A lot of my work is actually trying to remove or reduce the regulatory barriers to the advancement of the clean energy economy. And as the Tennessee Office Director, my work is focused in Tennessee, so I work to try to move the needle with the Tennessee Valley Authority. But my organization works throughout the Southeast, so we also have offices in Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and Alabama. And we've really seen incredible momentum in many of our states moving forward with decarbonization plans in Virginia and North Carolina. We've had, you know, there's obviously some ups and downs as the political pendulum swings, but also Georgia has become a real place where there's been a significant advancement in the amount of investment in solar energy in the past several years. And we work closely with other nonprofit organizations and often represent them in proceedings. So the Southern Alliance for Clean Energy is our client in some of those proceedings. And I'm happy to talk more about exactly what we do, but I will just echo what Regan said about there being a role for English majors or journalism majors, because to be a lawyer, you have to really love to write, and you also have to love facts and telling stories with actual facts. But I think that that's something that a question I get a lot from undergrads who are considering law school is, you know, what skills do I need to be a lawyer? And I think that's something that, you know, you kind of have the Perry Mason or whatever, I don't know what the modern equivalent of that is. What, like Legally Blonde, kind of, I'm still like decades late, I know, but or decades behind, but you have this idea that you stand up in court all the time, but a lot of what you do as a lawyer is actually sit down at your desk with a lot of documents and weave together a compelling story that you present to a judge or another decision maker. So writing is a big part of it. But I'll also echo what Susan was saying, that I work really closely with lots of other types of experts. So in many of our cases, we're working with people who have expertise in modeling the electric grid. We're working with people who have expertise in geology, hydrogeology. I'm starting to collect what all the different names of biologists are. Like, we've worked with malacologists. Anyone want to guess?
Malacologists, anyone know? You can't Google. Tell us, Amanda.
They work on mollusks, and in particular, and asticologists work on crayfish in particular. So I get to work with a lot of different kinds of scientific and engineering experts in my work, and those are, additional roles, and these are all people who are working to advance the clean energy economy while protecting our natural resources. So I'll turn it back over to you. Thanks.
Amanda, thank you so much. Susan, I'd love to jump back to you right away because you mentioned coming from Berkeley, which is essentially the nerve center of the clean tech economy. So there was quite a big transition for you, I'm sure, personally, culturally, politically, from Northern California to Tennessee. And I think that's part of this, what's so fascinating about this story. This is a uniquely promising region for tremendous and sort of unexpected growth in these clean tech industries. It's also probably a uniquely difficult region. And so I'd like to get into that a little bit up front. What's both promising and also really difficult about doing this work here? And Amanda, you mentioned there's this kind of swinging political pendulum. We don't have to get too deeply into that, but Susan, I'd like to start with just your personal experience of coming from, paradise,
so,
essentially.
I can say it's been wonderful to come here. I look at it as there's just so much opportunity. I mean, in a way, I was in California where everybody's on the bandwagon. They've been there for a long time, and we're all doing good things, but there's a lot of work to do, and a lot of us can have a great positive impact here, right? So I just feel like the opportunity is great. The time is perfect. And for me being at Oak Ridge, where in recent years, the Department of Energy, who's basically our main sponsor, has been more interested in the labs having a footprint in the regional area. And so I feel just thrilled, and I think our scientists do as well, to be able to work with partners in the state to think about, how to take technologies out of the lab into the ecosystem. So I view it as an opportunity. There's a lot of things. I think if we look back in 5 and 10 years, what Tennessee is like, we are at the beginning of something new. I sense that I'm still very much a newbie, so you guys will have to correct me, but that's my impression.
Yeah. And Amanda, could you build on that a little bit? Sort of what, of course, you are centered in the South. You do the work very, essentially here.
Yeah.
What's most difficult about that? And then we'll go to Stephen and Regan.
Sure, absolutely. So I think opportunity and difficulty. Right now, at this very moment, we live in a region that is served by a federal utility, the Tennessee Valley Authority, which our current administration has set very ambitious decarbonization goals, including decarbonizing the electric grid by 2035. The president has said we have a narrow window of time to reduce emissions, and we have to decarbonize the grid in order for decarbonization of our transportation and buildings to, to maximize the value of those transitions. And so as a federal utility, I think there is a very big opportunity there for the Tennessee Valley Authority to work quickly to decarbonize its grid. Unfortunately, the challenge is that it is not doing so. I neglected to answer part of your last question, but I'll do so now, which is to say that a big part of my work and a piece that I'm excited about is advocating for the Tennessee Valley Authority to invest in a clean energy portfolio, including solar, storage, energy efficiency, demand response, and wind, rather than investing in new fossil technologies like, in particular, natural gas.
Yeah.
And so TVA has, over the past year and a half, announced investments in new natural gas plants totaling 3,800 megawatts, and they've got another, I think, 1,450 megawatt investment coming up this year. And we've been very active in all of the administrative proceedings around that. We currently have multiple lawsuits pending against the Tennessee Valley Authority as part of an effort to support the current administration's decarbonization goals and frankly to protect all of the natural resources and the communities who live in our region.
Yeah, that raises this question we'll get to in a bit, which is what is clean energy? What's cleaner than coal, but what is actually true clean energy? And there's a lot of debate around that. But Stephen and Regan, I'd love to hear you hit this question of what is, certainly we know that it's, you clearly believe in the unique promise of this region or you wouldn't be here. But what's also uniquely difficult about doing what you're doing in Tennessee and in the Southeast?
Well, I mean, let's just face it, the South is predominantly conservative, resistant to a lot of regulatory oversight that has initiated a lot of the advancement of clean energy. We don't have a lot of the tools that have been used in other parts of the country. I mean, it was mentioned about renewable portfolio standards, which were requirements to get things going. There has been both legislative and just about every state, except for here in Tennessee, has a state energy regulator, that Public Service Commission, Public Utility Commission. The TVA is truly a unicorn, unique entity in the fact that it has no state regulatory oversight. The board of directors, which are appointed by the President of the United States and confirmed by the U.S. Senate, are both the regulator and the board for the federal corporation. And this is a model that is found nowhere else in the United States at the level that it is at TVA. And so we don't have, we can go to Georgia, we can go to North Carolina, we can engage in a regulatory proceeding to where we get the ability to intervene in a case, draw information out from the utility. Utility officials have to come in under oath. There is a very defined process. Here in the Tennessee Valley, TVA is subject to none of that. It is only by their voluntary willingness to periodically open up to share that information. They have no requirement, federally required or state requirement, that they have to allow this kind of engagement. So this lack of regulatory oversight has been extraordinarily problematic, and it is one of the reasons why TVA is a laggard in renewable energy development. I mean, they clearly are. If you look at all the other states around the region, Tennessee, and we do an annual report looking at this, when you compare TVA to, say, Duke Energy, which is in the Carolinas, or even Georgia Power, or Florida Power and Light and others like that, on renewable energy development, now I'm talking about solar, wind, as opposed to legacy dam projects that were originally constructed not to bring forth renewable energy. They were mainly designed for flood control and navigation, which is the primary purpose. The energy captured from them was a tertiary historic response. It was not the original intent. And so the very limited amount of renewable energy that TVA has largely been by accident of a historic phenomena that came along. They are now inching into the solar space, but they are still tremendously far behind in relationship to their peers in the Southeast. And we can get more into that.
Interesting. And Amanda, as you were saying, they are also uniquely positioned to do amazing things on clean energy. And so this plot, there could be a pretty significant plot twist in the coming years if we think optimistically here.
So I would love just to, so there was a few themes and I wanted to hit a few. You know, we talked about the panacea of California, and it's interesting because California has really driven adoption of renewables through a renewable portfolio standard, and they are the #1 state in the country for renewables. But that's not going to be true probably 3 or 4 years from now. The #1 state for renewables is eventually going to be Texas. And that is a completely different approach with an open access market and very transparent market pricing signals. And that's because renewables are cost competitive. Today, they're the cheapest form of new generation available. And I'm not saying one approach is better than the other, but there's no one approach that is the perfect approach to get us where we need to be. So we are unique here in the Valley. You know, TVA is a federally mandated utility. And there's a lot of pros to that, and there's some challenges to that. It's different than other regions. But we held out Georgia as a state that is you know, much like Tennessee, but has much further ahead in terms of adopting renewables. We've built over 50% of the solar and own it and operate it in the state of Georgia. All of it done in collaboration with the utility companies to meet customer needs. And all of it had all of these tangential positive economic development impacts. We partnered with farmers and ranchers. We provided renewable electrons at a lower cost than they could get natural gas or brown electrons for. And you know, we've spent now $3 billion in the state of Georgia. We're going to come close to doubling that over the next 3 years. That shows you the incredible power of collaboration. And it was really customer-led. And I feel like the people in this room, you know, Vanderbilt is a customer, very meaningful customer. Y'all are a big consumer of power on this campus, and you have a voice. You know, the reason TVA has a renewable program now is really because Google and Meta demanded it. I mean, it's not because litigation or anything else. It's because customers said, if you want us to invest capital in this region and create jobs, we demand that you have a renewable energy solution. And oh, by the way, we don't think nuclear is renewable. And I mean, so students, you know, universities, consumers can drive the market, and you can do that. You know, TVA will respond to customer demand, and I think articulating that demand in a way and then positioning as an industry our ability to execute. It's a win-win-win. It is the lowest cost of power generation available today.
Stephen is going to jump in with the next question, but I'm curious from the audience, how many of you knew before Regan just stated that renewable energy is not only cost competitive, but actually more affordable than fossil fuel generated electricity? Maybe half, a little bit more than half the group, but it's an extraordinary moment in the conversation about what is doable and what is profitable. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I think, Regan, what you were just saying sort of naturally leads us to this, you know, your description of the growth, especially in Tennessee and in the Southeast, leads us to these questions of scaling, which I feel like come up quite often when we talk about how do we expand the reach of renewable energy. And so I would love to pose the question, what are some of the big challenges to scaling up some of these technologies? Regan, I think you just talked about the power of the voice, right? The power of the public voice. But maybe I'd love to ask Susan, what are some of the technological challenges that you see in terms of, you know, getting some of these technologies and promising advances, you know, scaling them up to a larger, to reach a larger population?
Well, if I could piggyback on what you said, you mentioned the huge amount of funding that was going into IRA and BIL, so in this administration, right? A real big strategy of that is to make some of these technologies energy storage, hydrogen, enhanced geothermal, just a range of different clean energy technologies actually cost competitive, right? And so the strategy there is really to give companies a chance to go out there and do this and hire the workforce to do that, right? So so financial incentive for companies to try this is one thing. As you folks probably know, when I talk with people around here about a lot of the possibilities for growing big initiatives in the state and so forth, workforce development is huge here in Tennessee. It's always identified skilled, and folks with college backgrounds and of all sorts, right? Companies want to come here knowing that there is a workforce that's interested in working in the industry. So both of those are real limitations, I would say.
Yeah, let me put a little different frame on this. We're not doing solar because it's just a neat technology. Solar, in many ways, is the solution to the climate crisis. We've got to start thinking about deploying renewable technology to scale, okay? I mean, I love what Regan's saying, but we're not going to solve the climate crisis by waiting for Meta and Google to sort of come along and do something. We're going to have to set really aggressive targets, and we're going to have to go out there and meet those targets in order to basically decarbonize the grid. And so, yes, it's wonderful when companies do the things to green themselves up. But if we don't have really aggressive targets, we're going to run out of time, folks, on solving the problem when you look at the pace of what's happening. So what we're seeing is, yeah, we've got to do all these things, but we're also going to have the administration setting these targets and enforcing these targets, and we're going to have to see the utilities scaling. The only utility in the Southeast that's truly talking about scaling is Florida Power and Light. They laid out a proposal called Real Zero, where they are now talking about 93,000 megawatts, which is, 93 gigawatts of solar production. Nobody else in the Southeast is talking about that kind of scale. Nobody can handle that kind of scale, and it's not going to happen by waiting for, a few people in industry to sort of say, okay, we want to buy it. TVA doesn't have that ambition. Nobody else in the Southeast has. We've got to start focusing on solving the climate crisis and scaling to that level. The rest of the stuff is great. I mean, I think it's wonderful that companies are doing it, but it's not going to solve the crisis.
So this begs the question that we got to a little bit earlier, which is what is clean energy, right? And I think we probably on the panel all have different definitions of what that is. I know TV recently greenlit a natural gas plant, which ostensibly is a lot cleaner than coal, but is it clean energy? I know there's some controversy as to whether nuclear, it's carbon-free, but is it clean energy, right? So what is clean energy, and what is this kind of whole landscape that we're calling green jobs or smart jobs or clean jobs, because that can be defined in lots of different ways. So maybe everybody gets a shot at that. Amanda?
You can probably see that I picked up my microphone to respond to this right away. Our organization's position is that natural gas is not clean energy, and in many ways, from a greenhouse gas perspective, it is no better than coal. It does have lower carbon emissions that it emits when the plant burns methane gas, but the methane that leaks all along the distribution system, not to mention when they extract it from the ground, is an extremely potent greenhouse gas that has its strongest effects within the first 20 years after it's released into the atmosphere. So from a greenhouse gas perspective, natural so-called natural gas is not clean, and it's not, and we have moved far beyond the time when we should be replacing, retiring fossil fuel with new fossil fuel plants. There are lots of options that would eliminate the need for building new fossil fuel plants at this point, which is what Steve was describing. I will say, just for context, that our General Assembly here in Tennessee is currently considering a bill that would define pretty much everything except coal as clean energy for purposes of local renewable portfolio standards, of which there is exactly one in Tennessee, and that is here in Nashville.
Does everybody know what a renewable portfolio standard is? Anybody want, raise your hand if you know what a renewable portfolio standard is. Okay, it's a term that gets thrown around a lot, but if somebody here, Amanda, if you could just define that, it's often called RPS, but this is industry jargon. Can you just explain?
Yeah, it's pretty much what Steve was just describing, except instead of being defined by the greenhouse gas emissions, it's actually usually the technology. So something is defined as a renewable energy source, and it'll say, 30%, 90%, whatever percentage of the electricity for the state or the local government or the community-wide standard has to come from a renewable energy source.
So it's a state-level standard that requires a certain percentage of power production from a renewable or clean energy source. And what you're saying is it can be defined in different ways, and Tennessee is trying to define it differently than maybe other states.
Well, and it's not limited just to states. I mean, you can have local governments can take on and adopt a goal or a standard, which becomes a mandate that requires, now mandate for some people in conservative parts of the world is, a great faux pas, but, the reality is that setting these targets is what drove the price of renewables down, so the markets actually operate and allow renewables to actually be competitive. It was that going through that phase that scaled the renewables to the point that they were actually cost competitive. So local governments can do it, state governments do it. We can have a federal RPS. Matter of fact, there's been discussion many times in some of the federal bills to look at setting a national standard, but it usually gets shot down by some of the political forces that oppose that kind of stuff. But it is a tool that guarantees that you're going to get to this level. And as we begin to see some of the challenges we're facing, I mean, let me just say this. You can look at this strictly through an economic lens, or you can invert it and say, what is more fundamental, protecting the environment, or, and it's not to say you can't make them work together, but at some point, something has to trump what is happening. And my sense is it has got to be that we're doing how we produce and consume energy. We've got to do it in such a way that is not diminishing the future and causing climate disruption. That has got to be the fundamental basis, and then you build the economics around that. But if you invert that to where you're only focused on the economics, we're not going to get there, folks. And so they don't have to be completely separate. I'm not saying they can't work together, but something's got to be fundamental.
Susan, jump in, and then Regan, and we'll go back to what's your definition of clean energy. But Susan, please.
Well, actually, I was going to, you said clean energy and clean jobs. So yeah. Following on what you said, I'd just like to also mention clean jobs, in my opinion, also applies to how we understand and protect our world and our environment, right? And so there's all kinds of aspects that the natural world is playing in a role, both to understand the response of the world to a changing climate, but also understand how we can use natural solutions, right? Plants and soils take up carbon, and how durable is that storage, and what's happening as we have more CO2. Can we enhance that? Can we enhance the storage? I mean, thinking about the water resources and how weather's changing and what this means. I mean, this is really an interconnected system, and I think on the scientific side, there's a lot of work to be done and a lot of jobs in really understanding the natural system, and I would say a real sort of frontier area in environmental sciences, how is the system interacting, the natural and the built environment? Those right now in the scientific world are fairly decoupled, but they're not, right? They really are not. And so a lot of the work in the science world is going on to try and understand if you put these strategies over there, what does it mean to the system? How is climate changing? What are the stressors? What are the resources in the area where you're trying to think about deploying a system of energy technologies, for example? So a lot of cool jobs in that area too, I would say.
Can I just layer onto that, Susan? Because I think, and Regan, I'm sorry, I interrupted you, but I think there's also a layer of environmental justice and equity that goes along with that. There's, especially with, the advances in big data and mapping, it's just a really exciting time for understanding and being able to advocate more successfully and clearly about the cumulative burdens that our existing energy system imposes on Black and brown communities across the country. And Amanda mentioned our work in South Memphis. That is a community that has an oil refinery, a retired coal plant that's leaking coal ash into threatening their drinking water aquifer, a natural gas plant, one of the largest cargo airports in the country. All of these sources that not only are contributing to greenhouse gases, but are also imposing incredible levels of air toxics into the community. So I think it's just, an incredible opportunity to understand and advocate for changes that are going to lessen those burdens rather than exacerbate them with continuing to rely on fossil fuels.
Sure.
Yeah, there's almost no industry or frontier or aspect of education, even medicine. All these fields are getting reimagined as in the ways that they're intersecting with the climate issue and this decarbonized economy. Yeah, Regan.
So I would just, as an author or a room full of people will be writing papers, I would probably mark your paper up if you wrote clean energy, because I think words matter. There is renewable energy. There is no free pass. Like I'm a huge solar proponent. I started a solar company because I felt like we needed to accelerate our transition to renewables. But our plants have footprints. We've worked very hard to partner with domestically manufactured low carbon solar module manufacturers. We signed a recycling agreement so that our modules, they have 40-year useful lives, but then they're e-waste basically. So we've helped, we're the keystone customer of a startup recycling company that's going to be able to recycle 95% of the output from these modules. But every one of our energy sources has some impact. Hydro sounds great now, but when they first flooded those communities, I promise you there was all types of pushback about that. Wind has an impact. I would say wind and solar have much less impact than fossil-based fuels. And then I would say carbon-free is the other distinction. Nuclear is not renewable energy, but it is carbon-free energy. So I just think words matter, and when you write, being thoughtful about how you describe the different categories that you're trying to address, because every form of energy production has a footprint.
Nearly half of the energy under TVA is nuclear, which again is in this sort of questionable area, and there's a lot of environmental infighting about this. Is it a base load energy that needs to be part of our clean energy portfolio or our climate era energy portfolio? Is that in the category of clean energy? And I'm sure that everyone has a different opinion about that, but I think we have to hit that question. Do you have an opinion on that? Anyone here?
Yeah, let me just, when we view it energy sources, and Regan's absolutely right. Everything has an impact. And we've got to be aware of these life cycle impacts across all the technologies. The first thing that we need to take note of is the greenest electron is the one you never use. And so energy efficiency, first and foremost, is where we need to go, because there is so much waste in this country. There's so much that we take for granted, and there's so much opportunity to continue to decrease and become more efficient in how we do. And it's almost like the gift that keeps giving, because we've heard over and over again, you go from the incandescent bulb, which used to burn your fingers when you had it, to the curly-Q things, the compact fluorescents. They drop from 100 watts to, say, 15 watts. Then you go from compact fluorescents to LEDs, and they go from 15 watts, to like less than 5, right? And so we're continuing to see tremendous strides. And as the Silicon Valley and others get into this space, because quite honestly, utilities have not been that innovative, but we are beginning to see more and more folks get into this space, and I think energy efficiency is the first and foremost. And then the renewables, clearly wind and solar. Look, the only thing that I can count on every single day, the sun comes up in the east and it sets in the west. It is consistent. And we need to be thinking about biomimicry, where we're actually working with the planet and understanding how the planet has survived, and developed over the billions of years that it's been here. And so I think using the technologies to capture and work with nature instead of against nature. Because think about what we're doing. When we get into fossil, you're going parasitically into the ground, you're pulling out historic carbon that has been sequestered, and you're burning it and liberating it into the atmosphere uncontrollably. And then it overwhelms the natural systems that cycle that. So we need to get where we're cycling carbon in real time, and we were just talking about that. When you get to things like, so don't call natural gas natural. It's not. It's fossil gas. We should talk about it as fossil gas. You should talk about coal as fossil fuels. Talk about oil and gasoline as fossil fuels. And then when you get to nukes, the thing you've got to think about is, there's a whole history. We don't advocate for new nuclear power development. We're not advocating to shut all the nuclear power plants down, because they are playing a very important role. The question is, where do we go from here? How do we look? And because the climate crisis is so serious, we need to put all the technologies on the table, and we need to be doing the research. But then we need to be very careful about which ones we select and deploy, and whether they are actually going to perform. Not a single nuclear power plant in the Southeast has ever come on time or on schedule or on budget. And once they get going, some of them are working now, but there's been a lot of money put into that. They're looking at what are called small modular reactors, which, we'll see where that goes. We don't know it. We don't know yet whether they're going to be in the money to be able to actually compete cost competitively. And we also don't know whether the technology is going to be deployed. And so we need to look at this, but the main thing is we have the ability to be deploying renewables much more quickly. TVA, as we were talking about, you gave the breakdown, the 40% nukes. Let's focus on getting TVA to 40, 50% renewables before we're talking about bringing more nuclear power plants online and distracting and taking away from the ability to deploy this technology that we know works as fast as possible.
Susan, did you want to jump in?
Well, if I can say something just a little bit different and maybe further along, I know we're talking about near term, and you're probably going to have a heart attack when I say this, because we're also working on fusion energy. And I know that's way, people always think fusion energy is always something that's a few decades out, but this administration has recently declared a bold new vision for fusion with the idea, and there's, billions of dollars of private sector investment going into that, and for that reason, the government sort of stepping up and figuring out how we can accelerate fusion energy, which is a carbon-free energy source with very little waste, unlike fission itself. So anyway, just a heads up, that's something that if it is as ambitious as it could be something in 10 years. And honestly, if fusion could work, it could really be fairly globally game-changing, but that's not at our doorstep right now.
And again, I have no opposition to the research in it. I think what we're seeing, though, is we're seeing TVA in many ways. When you talk carbon plan, they talk nukes instead of talking about ramping up aggressively on the deployment of renewables to where they're scaling the renewables at the level we need to be talking about. And that, to me, means that they're sort of holding back for something that is yet not ready for prime time.
This is, I feel like this conversation could just keep going and keep getting more and more interesting. I love this because these frontiers, right, of energy are, there's so many unknowns, right? There's so many untested frontiers. But I wonder if we could pivot for just a minute and just, I want to turn it over to questions from the audience in a minute, but before we do that, I wanted to just go down the line and wonder if each of you could offer some advice, either from your own experience or from what you're seeing in the sector, to people who are saying, how does my awesome skill set, right, that we have in attendance right here, how can I apply that to some of these issues that we're talking about? So what advice, either from your professional or personal history, could you offer to our audience?
Well, I'll just start real quick. I think learn and understand, because most people, they walk in their house, they flip the light switch on, they don't even think about where this comes from. I mean, when I gave up my veterinary practice and started to focus on energy issues, if you think about it, it is the nexus of our future, because it is the driving force that is causing the climate disruption and the destabilization that we're seeing. And so you've got to spend some time educating yourself. And as you begin to educate yourself, these opportunities that we're talking about begin to open up at a phenomenal scale, because we're on just climbing a disruption curve on electrification of transportation. And it is going to accelerate much, much faster than anybody is predicting right now, because when you get in the technology, it's like the difference between, if you get into Tesla right now, it's like the difference between having a flip phone and a smartphone was, when they first came out. They're fundamentally different. Now, not all the automobile manufacturers are there yet. There's going to be some misfires, but some are cracking the nut and leading and demonstrating, and that is going to create the change. But let me say one other thing. We have got to begin to reevaluate the basic worldview that we have, because that's actually most fundamental. And I think that there are ways to engage this issue by rethinking, our worldview. Our worldview creates worlds, and the worlds that we create is what we live with. And so there's opportunities even in the humanities and in philosophy and in cosmology and other things to rethink our relationship with the natural world. And that is actually more fundamental, and I think is a phenomenal area to be thinking about. And I think it's going to help create the change to where we see the integration that we need between technology and the natural world.
I love your point that there is so much innovation that's underway that's about technology that supports and amplifies natural systems rather than competes with them, right? I mean, you can have this sort of radically traditional area of high-tech innovation. And Susan, it's a perfect transition to you. I mean, what are you looking for when you're hiring students into your laboratory? What's your advice for young people entering this space?
Sure. Well, I love your beautiful prose. I'm just going to be very practical. I'm a scientist. I mean, I would say, first of all, I think, the expectations are that folks coming out of school now are going to have many, 4, 5, 6 different types of careers over your life. So, I mean, I say first and foremost, don't be afraid to learn, obviously, but also to ask questions, to do internships, to reach out, to ask, for a conversation, informational interviews, if you will. I don't know if people do shadowing anymore. I don't see that too much, but I really think that it's not just learning about the system and what sector, but what type of job do you like? And I think internships are just amazingly important for understanding what fits your aspirations and uses your skills best. And there's lots of different paths you can take, right? And until you try it, you really, really don't know. So, I mean, I've made different decisions in my life, and I think every time I do that, I just always, really think about what inspires me, where I feel I can have the greatest impact, right? Where I get fulfillment. I mean, those are the things that moves me from one step to another. But you have to start by taking that step, and you never know, right, until you take a step into this way and that way and that way, and you, I mean, ultimately build your path till maybe where you will stay for a long time. So I guess very practical is, you know, look around, talk to people, pick up the phone or internet or whatnot, you know, just have conversations and ask about jobs and maybe try a few out. I mean, that's really how it has worked for me.
I would encourage you to, if your passion leads you in any way to want to be a part of the energy transition, you can check so many boxes. Trillions of dollars are going to be invested, and the energy transition gives you the ability to play in so many different ways and to correct some historic wrongs, because investing in underserved communities with clean energy technology is a total positive. It's a win-win-win. So I would say get into, there's so much growth happening that someone who describes a 5-year plan to you for their business is wrong. Like, it is interesting. I think back when I was Commissioner of Revenue, incredible platform to meet business leaders. And I was at dinner with Carlos Ghosn, who used to be the CEO of Nissan, and it was when Nissan was doing the Leaf, which at the time was a 60-mile-an-hour range EV. And we're working with them, and they located their battery plant here in Tennessee. And we were also dealing with the global CEO of Volkswagen Group. And they were very much focused on wringing efficiency out of the internal combustion engine. This is pre-Dieselgate. And they were going to skip EVs and go straight to hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. And they actually had us out to Wolfsburg. We drove a fuel cell vehicle, and it wasn't that great, would be my summary of the experience. I drive an EV now. I love it. They're fast. They're quiet. But I asked Mr. Ghosn at dinner, I was like, you're betting $1 billion on EVs, and you know, why? We're sitting here dealing with Volkswagen, and they say there's decades worth of efficiencies from the internal combustion engine, and that the next stop will be hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. And his comment was, speed to market matters, and the infrastructure play is what matters. And he's like, EVs will be first to market. They're cheaper, they're less complicated, they're going to get better and better and better. And once you have EV fueling stations, you're not going to have hydrogen fuel cell stations for individual auto. And it is interesting because, you know, Carlos Ghosn now, he had his own series of scandals, and then the Volkswagen had their Dieselgate emission scandal. But now, you know, Volkswagen is basically saying they're going to start phasing out the internal combustion engine. What a sea change. And those dialogues were 12 years ago. So I just think if you're interested in this space, get your foot in the door anywhere that you feel like the people you're with are credible and smart and exciting. And then just, there is so much growth here, you will do well. So I would say pick people you like and a mission that you are excited about, and then just get involved.
And just as Susan was saying, that it is such a whole systems picture. As the grid gets cleaner, greener, the cars get cleaner, and you see this sort of co-evolution of the energy and the transportation sectors in such an exciting way. Amanda, what is your advice to the students rising up into environmental law?
Well, I'm blessed to be going last in a panel of very wise people, so I'm going to keep this short, but I'll just echo what...
Don't forget your
sorry. I'm blessed to be on a panel with very wise people who have pretty much given you the best advice, so I'll just echo that I think the clean energy transition and addressing climate change there's room for all comers. So whatever your skill set is, whatever your passion is, you can find a home in this work, and it will evolve over time. I think all of our careers have evolved over time. You know, I started out as an environmental lawyer and have ended up as an energy lawyer. You know, those things have very much come together over the course of my career. But I think everybody can contribute to positive change in this space. And so just don't feel like your skill set, it doesn't have something to offer here.
Great, thank you all so much. That's a lot to think about and a lot to go on. So, and thank you to you all for listening and for hanging in there. I want to turn it over to you and your questions. What questions do you have for our panelists about the energy future and the energy transition? What's on your mind? And there's a microphone in the middle of the room. If you could go to the microphone and you could, yeah, I mean, you can. There's plenty of room.
Okay. Hello. I guess my question would be, I think that like we have all kind of seen this narrative that revolves around like green energy and climate change is kind of an individual issue. Maybe this idea of like, oh, we should all be like reducing, reusing, and recycling. And I wonder if you guys see that as kind of a challenge to advocacy for these kind of green energies on a broader scale, if that makes sense.
So let me make sure I understand your question. That by focusing on the individual, we may be missing the scaling. You know, the reality is that it's going to take both, and I think that you can't focus only and put all the blame on the individual, because these are infrastructure investments and multi-billion-dollar decisions that are not being made by individuals at an individual level. It's made by policy, you know, either the federal government, state government, or at corporate level types of things. So we've got to hold the corporations and the governments accountable, but you can make very real decisions about how you live your life and the choices you make about your carbon footprint, and that does matter. And as everybody engages in that, it does have a material difference. I mean, whether you know, the car you drive, how you drive the car, you know, do you turn the lights off? You know, are you reaching for more efficient appliances? And as you become homeowners, what are you doing in your home? You know, and how are you, where you work, are you encouraging that kind of stuff? So it matters. I think it takes, like say, all comers, all levels.
I would just say the one thing I worry about in terms of how it impacts advocacy, there's so much agreement out there that renewables are great and recycling is wonderful. And a lot of companies, you know, I don't know if we mentioned it, but Shell Oil owns a portion of my company. We let them invest in our company. And they spend a tremendous amount of advertising dollars talking about their green initiatives. But if you look at their capital plan, it's almost imperceptible how much of their budget actually goes to the initiatives they advertise so much about. And I think what was surprising to me, we're a small company still. We were started here by 3 people. One was a chairman, so there's only 2 employees and an unpaid intern from Vanderbilt. And when the last study came out from the EIA, Silicon Ranch we had developed, built, owned, and operated 3% of all the utility scale solar in the country. That was terrifying to me. If I had read the press releases, I would have thought we wouldn't even have registered. But there is so much work to be done to even come close to getting to the scale that we need to get to. So I think complacency, thinking that, oh, this has already been figured out, it's not even close to having been figured out.
And I loved your point earlier, Regan, and I think, Stephen, you spoke to this too, that Vanderbilt is a really important player in this conversation and this energy transition in this region. So the individual voices of students and the kind of culture and community of Vanderbilt around climate solutions and commitment to energy transition, just energy transition, is also hugely important to then what happens and radiates out from this campus.
Yeah, utility investment, utility, you know, how they manage their investment portfolio and what they invest in is critically important. And does Vanderbilt have a decarbonization plan that is locked and loaded and being executed? You know, those are all real things that need to be happening at all universities.
Hi, thank you so much for all your advice and knowledge. I was curious, this panel has been a lot about top-down approaches, and I was curious what y'all's thoughts and opinions were on like community-based organizations' role in this work and, you know, other bottom-up approaches like that.
Amanda, and I know Regan, you were talking also about community solar. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think the answer is absolutely. Community organizations, neighborhood organizations are really important in this. And in the energy space, I'll speak to in particular, you know, we have in Tennessee, we have local utilities that are public power. They are supposed to be democratically accountable to the public that they serve. So they're owned either by cities or by the members themselves. And so the more active people are and engaged they are with their local power company and asking for more access to renewable energy, more energy efficiency, a more resilient grid, the faster I think we will move the needle on decarbonization in Tennessee. And I think that plays out across, you know, you also see grassroots engagement around pipeline infrastructure. That's a huge, you know, we had a big pipeline case in Memphis where the community banded together and successfully, you know, ultimately resulted in the cancellation of a new crude oil pipeline that would have connected two major crude oil pipelines and made it easier for them to deliver crude oil for export. So grassroots, absolutely necessary. And I will just put a plug in for the Nashville Electric Service has two wonderful board members who are affiliated with Vanderbilt, including one who's sitting in this room. And they have been really instrumental in pushing some incredible change at Nashville Electric Service, including, I believe, the first time in history, the Nashville Electric Service Board passed a resolution opposing the construction of a new gas combined cycle plant in TVA territory. So absolutely very important.
When I first moved here, I remember calling NES and saying they had a green power switch program. And I remember calling and saying, I want to make the green power switch. And I felt very empowered as a New York transplant, calling up my local utility and making the green power switch. But I invested something like 11 cents a month in, you know, in some clean energy sources. Regan, did you want to?
I would just, you have incredible power as a consumer and frankly as a student body that can coordinate and bring a lot of individuals together. You know, I think thoughtful correspondence and participation in board meetings and writing letters. You know, TVA just had 5 new board members appointed by the Biden administration. Outreach to say, hey, this is important to us. This is on our radar screen. We want to be in Tennessee, and it's a part of our environmental future and our affordable energy future and economic development future. I think tremendous power. Like I said, to the extent you've seen real progress across our region that really doesn't have these mandated portfolio standards, it's been customers, consumers, and advocates that have advanced this revolution, and it has made a difference, but it definitely needs to accelerate.
I want to be mindful of the time. I know you all we're keeping you a little bit late. I know you have things to, can you take a few more questions? Okay, you're up.
Okay, so I just want to say thank you all for traveling and being here and giving us your perspectives. I just want to introduce myself first. My name is Carl Sedkowski. I'm a graduate student actually at the education school here. It's called Peabody College. I'm in a program called International Education Policy and Management. And so my interest really involves climate change in education, but it's a new interest. I wanted to ask you, because throughout this conversation, I heard allusions to education. but I think I only counted one explicit reference to education. I was wondering if you have any colleagues who work in education in particular, who also work in climate change, if you have any speculations on emerging job roles in the future, hopes, whatever like that. And as an aside, I am actually looking for an internship this summer. So very shameless networking plug, but I'd love to talk with you afterwards if you have the time. Thank you.
I don't know what level of education you're looking at, but I can say that I have colleagues all over the world, right, that are focused. I'm an environmental scientist that are focused on environment and energy and education. It's a huge field, right? I mean, there's wonderful departments here. I see Padma sitting in the back there that are focused on that here at Vanderbilt as well. And, you know, if you're interested, there are a lot of internship possibilities at Oak Ridge, so happy to help you, but it's pretty easy to find if you just Google interns, summer interns at Oak Ridge National Laboratory. And I would say that a thing that's nice about the laboratory is it does work in conjunction with UT and Vanderbilt and other universities in the area. So while national laboratories don't have an education mission per se, there's a lot of partnership across the organizations that do have an education mission, as well as, I should say, community colleges and so forth that are really trying to grow workforce in some of these areas, certification programs and all kinds of neat stuff.
Great. Hi, everyone. My name is Charlie. Just wanted to say thank you all for making the time to be here. I've really felt my knowledge grow a lot in the past hour and a half. So you guys established definitely how renewables are more cost effective, they're better for environment. So what is stopping really the TVA and on our level like the conservative state politicians in the General Assembly from taking advantage of these renewable energies, and what more would happen for TVA to need to go ahead and actually embrace them?
Well, I don't know if we have enough time to really get in. I mean, I think several of us could wax eloquently on what we see as the shortfalls. I mean, unfortunately, and I think we don't want it to become a polarized issue, but you have seen some elements, both on the left and the right, that have gravitated towards making sort of, Green New Deal issues, and then, green socialism issues, and you can go across the spectrum. At TVA, it is that in my opinion, the executive leadership does not consider renewables a priority, does not consider renewables a major engine that they can use, and they are betting on other technologies first and foremost, and I think they're doing just enough renewables to kind of keep the criticism at bay. To TVA's credit, right now they have the lowest carbon emission profile of any utility in the Southeast on a pounds per megawatt hour, which means the emissions based on the amount of energy they generate. And that is because they have dropped and moved away from coal, and they have stumbled, honestly, into the nuclear power issue, because they didn't originally go into nuclear power for carbon-related issues. They went into it in the 1970s, and they have sort of backed their way into getting some of these plants on recently after they've struggled with them for over 40 years. So it hasn't been the kind of intentionality from the original inputs. But what is necessary is that there's got to be this new board. The new board members that were appointed, they've got to exert policy pressure on the executive staff and make it a policy priority for TVA to lead in the renewable space. That is not happening right now.
We've worked with a lot of utilities across the country. And, in utilities, one of the few monopoly industries that we still have. And these are good jobs and it's an older industry with a lot of people with 20 plus years of tenure that if they get to 30, they get a pension and a retirement. And change is incredibly stressful. And this is a state industry that hasn't changed in decades, and all of a sudden it's going through a sea change where people are like, man, I don't need, this is all getting away from me, but if I can put it off for 3 or 5 years and wait for modular nuclear, wait for fusion to finally work, then it'll be fine. I'll be retired and it can be the next generation. So like y'all are the next generation. Like, so, you know, it really is going to take a change of heart and some responsible dialogue with people who are very uncomfortable with this whole energy transition happening. And then it's going to take new people and coming in that are embracing, you know, we grew up with a centralized power generation system, just like we grew up with landlines. And now we're going to a decentralized power generation system like with cell phones. You know, I guarantee you, one of our board members was the head of global long distance for AT&T. He said it was the worst job he's ever had in his life, even though it was so incredibly profitable, because they saw the sea change. Their whole careers, landline long distance, were just disappearing because everybody was adopting cellular technology. So do have some empathy, I would say, as you look out, because this is stress. Sea change like this doesn't happen often, and it's really stressful for these utilities.
Right, and to make these investments in this, you know, these new distributed technologies does imply cost for TVA. I mean, we don't want to imply that it's near-term cost for long-term economic benefit, but it does imply near-term costs. So
you could say instantaneous savings. I mean, it is not economics that's keeping TVA from moving forward.
Yeah. Now, that's just happened in the last few years, but it is now a fact. And I honestly do not believe that that has been fully internalized in the leadership of TVA to where they are making the best planning decisions based on this new reality.
that's fascinating. Thank you.
Thank
Great
you.
question. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Brianna. I'm a senior studying environmental science here at Vandy. I have a question for Regan specifically. So you mentioned a few times the field of agrovoltaics, which I'm not very familiar with, but sounds fascinating. So I would like to hear a little bit about your partnership with farmers and how you support and amplify natural systems.
Sure, and this could be a whole nother topic, but so as solar we're a long-term developer, owner, operator. And when we first started, we bought the land where our solar arrays were located. And I was like, well, how do you manage vegetation under your solar arrays? So I just looked at who TVA used to manage their vegetation, and I hired them. And what they did was use a lot of herbicide and growth retardant on the vegetation. And that works wonderfully for the first 3 years. And then you lose all vegetation, and we started having tremendous erosion problems. So we were starting to see, hey, this is an issue. We didn't really have an answer for it. And very fortuitously, we bought a site in Georgia, and it had made the newspaper. It was, I don't know, 1,200 acres or something. And our neighbor was one of the very first, in fact, was the first regenerative rancher to sell grass-fed cattle to Whole Foods. And he was worried. He had been managing his property regeneratively for 20 years. And he was worried the solar company was going to move next door and start using herbicides and pesticides and pollute his water and impact his operations. So actually Matt Beasley, another Vanderbilt graduate, and myself got in the car, drove down there, met Will at a big farmhouse table, and he was loaded for bear. He was really ready to read us the riot. But he was, I found him completely fascinating. My father was actually a poultry scientist, so I had some background around farming, and he and I hit it off. We spent the whole day him showing me how he has 15 species going on this ranch. It is, it's regenerated this entire small community, Bluffton, Georgia. It's profitable. And we ended up striking a deal over a handshake of why don't I let you manage my land for me using your livestock? And that actually, as we started exploring that, I was like, why would I just do this on that 1,200 acres? I've got tens of thousands of acres of land, and this is a best practice. So we've now done it for about 4 years on some of our sites. And we're seeing, we said if we did it, we wanted science. You would be proud. So we measured soil samples. We did all of, commissioned independent third parties to say, is this truly having an impact? And it has. The data is showing us we've got healthier grasses, we're sequestering carbon in the soil, we're partnering with ranchers, so keeping the land in agricultural production. In fact, we actually have now, we have our own flock of sheep. We have a whole staff of agrivoltaic technicians. We have a nationally renowned lamb geneticist that we've hired. And it's a whole, you know, if you have, it's a mindset change. I was viewing all these thousands of acres of vegetation that I had to manage so it didn't impact my solar arrays as a liability. And in reality, it's a huge asset. So finding a way to monetize that asset in a way that is good for the environment was really our whole focus on regenerative agriculture. And now we are a national leader. In fact, I'm excited. We said when we did this, we wanted to set the bar and let others follow. And now BP is doing this. You know, AEP, another huge publicly traded utility, hired our employee to go head up their practice, and I was thrilled because solar is going to take millions of acres of land, so you want that land managed as responsibly as possible, and we're at the cutting edge of setting the best standards for doing that. And there's a lot of opportunities there as well, if you're interested.
And as Susan was saying, soil is one of the most important carbon sequestration media on planet Earth. It may be the most. I think all told, agriculture, if well managed, could sequester as much CO2 as currently emitted by the transportation sector and almost as much as is currently emitted by the electricity sector. So agriculture can become the solution if soil is managed in a way that draws down and locks in carbon, is exactly what we're hearing. Yes?
I came a little late, so I might have missed further discussion on this, and I know you touched on it a little bit in the discussion that I was here for, but I would like to learn a little bit more about your sort of take on nuclear fusion and sort of how we're going to manage investment in that. While you guys already discussed how there are already implemented systems that need further investment that have readily shown that they are reliable sources of clean energy, how do we sort of balance this sort of burgeoning, really hopeful field that we've had really great groundbreaking like sort of research in terms of like, I don't remember the statistics exactly, but I believe there was fusion conducted last year that got a return of about like 30% energy more than what they put into it. So it's just really interesting preliminary findings and how that can sort of change humanity. I know you discussed that a little bit, but sort of elaborating on that would be pretty interesting to me.
So I can touch on the fusion part of the question. You're probably referring to the NIF experiment that was in Livermore, probably for fusion. And actually, if you look at the whole, I mean, that was really done for a different purpose other than fusion, commercial fusion energy. And if you look at the whole system surrounding that, it's certainly not net positive power. It's a long time to get net positive power. The first thing that one has to do, and the kind of fusion we're working on with, I should say there's a huge experiment going on in France. It's called ITER. 35 countries have come together to try and, it's called sustain a burning plasma, which is the first step on the way to commercial net power fusion. But it is the largest, I would say, clean energy project in the world. So it's a huge science project, and it is a very expensive one. But you know, I think that there's enough interest and milestones that have been reached to show that this is within the realm of possibilities. And so for that reason, in this country, there are a lot of investors that are sort of investing in what does commercial fusion look like. There's a lot of work to be done before we get there. I can say on the science side, we have to have materials that can withstand, you know, temperatures that are hotter than the sun and, you know, radiation, and we have to understand how to fuel these things. And, you know, so there's a lot of basic science to be done, but at the same time, it's at that stage where people are thinking, oh, maybe this could be a real thing. So for that reason, the government is now starting to figure out what does a private-public partnership look like. It's called a milestone, and they're really road mapping that right now. And I think in the next few years, we'll be seeing, in fact, there are some awards coming up for the, you know, between research organizations and the private sector to try and move this along. It's still pretty, I would say, you know, it's not within the next decade. We'd be really lucky if we saw something like that. But It could be within 2 decades, and if we can, I mean, imagine that, you know, I mean, we could have energy that is, you know, basically clean. We need some fuel to go into that, so it could be quite game-changing, but it's still pretty early stage.
Yeah, and look, I think the research is wonderful. I mean, I'm all about our organization's all about it. I think it needs to be looked at. I think the thing that we need to make sure is that and again, fusion research has been going on for decades and decades and decades. And yes, there does appear to have been a recent breakthrough, but it is unclear, as was just articulated, what we're looking at for sure. But we have technology that we know works right now, and we need to be scaling that as fast as possible. So let's just not keep
Saying it's always out.
yeah, something's going to come and let's wait for it. We can't wait anymore, folks. We got to move, and we've got to be deploying to scale, and we have the technologies to deploy at scale on the efficiency side and on the renewable side, and it's going to take years, decades, you know, to scale even those. And if the research continues to advance, so be it. That would be great. But let's not keep holding out for things when we have things that we know now can actually work.
Hi, thanks for being on the panel today, for sharing your information and your time. I have 2 questions, but since we're limited on time, you could just answer one if you want. The first one is kind of about, so like today, obviously the discussion was a lot about like grid capacity, whether expansion or replacement with renewables. And I was just wondering, like with the other side of that equation, with demand response, what role you see that playing in the future, and like how much attention has it been given in like both like private-public partnerships as well as just like business in general. And then my other question is like, how effective do you think state RPSs can actually be when it can just shift like fossil plants from like one state to another when we have like an interconnected electric grid? Thanks.
You know, on the demand side management, I mean, again, I mentioned efficiency. Demand side management is a huge thing, but you know, and there's the way that we're going to do a lot of the electric vehicle stuff is we're going to shift off a peak and to where we're charging, you know, when there's valleys. If you really understand how the grid profile runs, there's a peak and then there's valleys. And if we can incentivize charging into those valleys through load shifting and using demand side management to we already have enough power to bring most of the electrification we need in the vehicle space with the existing infrastructure we have. But we're going to have to be really smart, and we're going to have smarter grids. We're going to have smarter technologies. And then when we start having the cars starting to talk back to the grid with vehicle-to-grid kind of interactions, and then the utilities can actually then use the charging in the vehicles to actually dispatch when they need to. This is the integrated system that we need. We don't have that now, but it's a phenomenal way to really begin to integrate all these different technologies to where they sing and work together instead of being, you know, what the historic utility model is. We build a big baseload power plant and we push electrons at you. When I put solar on my roof and started pushing electrons back at TVA, for a little while they liked it. Then they got where they didn't like it because they like pushing the electrons at you. They don't want you pushing the electrons back at them, and that's part of this, you know, sort of cultural change that we need to have happen, where the leadership begins to see this integration as a positive thing instead of a threat.
And maybe our next Smart Jobs Summit could bring in the storage question, which is, of course, also part of our region, right? The battery alley, the battery development that is coming on in this region is also pretty thrilling. Final question. Thank you so much for your commitment here.
Oh, yes. So we are talking about transitions and smart jobs. I'm wondering about the jobs that may not be considered smart, quote unquote, or how to tangibly transition in those ways, how to smartify jobs, or even thinking about transitions, Stephen, going from doctor of veterinary medicine, maybe you're still practicing, I don't know, going from that to then SACE, and then for someone else, let's say they're pursuing dentistry, should they get a JD and do pro bono environmental justice cases at nighttime? Like different things like that for people already in the job force looking for like different ways to get green or clean.
I'm just going to ask Amanda if you want to respond to that, because I know you had an answer to the RPS question, and I cut you off.
I don't actually.
And then we could land on this great question.
Yeah, well, I don't have an answer to the RPS question specifically, but I just wanted to say that you made my day by asking a question about demand response. And if somebody wants to solve a $1 million or billion-dollar question, how do we make energy efficiency in demand response sexy? So for you communications and journalism folks, please. Advocates have been trying for decades to do that. But I also did just want to say demand response is also incredibly important to climate resilience. And we saw that here in the Tennessee Valley during the rolling blackouts right around Christmas time. So I do think that, in addition to playing a role in electrification, it's also very important for resilience for that. In terms of, I'm not exactly sure I understand your question. You're talking about people in the workforce. To some degree, that's a question, I think, about just transition, right? Like a lot of the coal plants and other big fossil infrastructure that's going offline, those are union jobs. They are, skilled workers, and where is their place in the clean energy economy? I think that's a really huge question. I will say that we have partners here in Tennessee that have done a jobs study just in terms of number of jobs. If you did a lot more energy efficiency and distributed solar that would require rooftop installers and things like that, you would generate a lot more jobs than you do by investing in new fossil resources. So there are new jobs. I think there's a question about how do we make them, jobs that compensate people the way that the jobs, the vanishingly small amount of jobs that our union jobs have in the past.
Yeah, and Regan, you had some interesting points about how you're drawing on such a range of talents as you build your fast-growing company. There's almost no set of talents, possibly veterinarianism. Oh, no, wait. You could employ a veterinarian.
We actually are looking, Steve, that safe thing doesn't work out.
That has a role at a solar company.
Yeah, my transition from veterinary medicine, I just sort of look at it, I'm starting to work with a larger patient. In veterinary medicine, my dad was a cardiologist here at Vanderbilt, and I used to joke about him, you only have to deal with one patient, I have to deal with a bunch. But in dealing with a bunch, you learn systems theories, because you've got to figure out how the digestive system works across a bunch of different animals. The planet has these phenomenal systems, and you can look at the planet as a living system, and as you begin to disrupt those systems, you begin to see disease, and you begin to see sort of the kind of manifestations of things getting out of balance, which is basically what medicine's all about, is keeping things in balance. So I just say, I just have a larger patient now.
Regan, did you want to finish off with just addressing this question of the range of experiences you?
It's interesting. So Matt Beasley, who's our chief commercial officer, sits on the board with me. He has an MBA from Vanderbilt, but when he interviewed with me, he also sold books door to door. And it was interesting because kind of once I heard that he had gone a whole summer waking up every day and cold calling on people to buy books and never had a day that he didn't get a sale, I was like, I don't care about all the other stuff. Like, that's a skill set of tenacity that we just want on staff. We just had a teacher who didn't enjoy teaching as much as he thought he would join our team. I would say pick a company. I go back to, there is so much opportunity in this space. Pick a group of people that you are interested in working with and just say, what can I do to help? You will quickly learn and plug in. And there's just a whole plethora of ways to monetize different skill sets. And there's a shortage of talent in the space. So if you're passionate, willing to work, willing to be curious, I think there's a job for you out there.
Pretty good place to end.
That seems like a great landing. Thank you all so much. Carol, for hanging in there.
Thank you so much.